Welcome back. It's Katie Crysdale here. I am thrilled to be joined by the creators of this amazing new product I saw at Stargard Elite's camp back in January. It's going to be a game changer for aquatics here in Canada and lifeguarding in general because of a pain point that it solves. So, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Can I get you guys to introduce yourselves and the name of your companies?
My name is Charles Rakowski, and I'm part owner of Barefoot and Steadfast. We have Kevin, part owner and the designer behind the tube. And then we have Blake, who is a part owner of both Barefoot and Steadfast.
Talk to me about Barefoot. You are a pool management company, but you have a ton of sites. That is a very different setup from what we have in Canada. So, what does that mean? What services do you provide?
Well, with Barefoot, our primary focus is community lifeguarding. We work within the communities with their pools. We do both the lifeguard services and the maintenance. I think one of the things that kind of us stand out, especially from the beginning, is that we do all of our training in house, and so we're able to hold a higher standard. And we've always used a Red Cross program. Now we're using Stargard. Our pride is that we wanted to put out better lifeguards.
So, for my understanding, you would basically get a contract to manage all aspects of the local community pool, and it would be staffing and maintenance. And then the people who own the pool, they don't have to worry about it at all.
Exactly.
How many guards are we talking here?
But we started out with 25 lifeguards in two pool facilities in 2009. Now we are going to run about 100 pool facilities, and about 1,200 lifeguards are going to go through our company this year, and we'll train all of them.
Holy cow, you are basically a medium municipality with that scale of staffing. And what kind of geographic span are we talking here?
Yeah, so we're in the Dallas Fort Worth area, and then we're also in Houston as well. So we're in two of the larger cities in Texas.
So, as lifeguards, talk me through what was the problem you were facing with existing tubes. And the reason I ask is because up here in Canada, you see tubes for sure in waterfront in some aquatic facilities that are indoors, but it is not the most widespread rescue aid in lifeguarding. What were the issues you were facing with your existing equipment?
The simplest thing to start out with is that we look at our tube as a rescue tool. It's always been something that, especially American lifeguards, are always carried with them, but it hasn't been developed well enough to actually be used as a proper tool, especially for teenagers. We have a lot of different textures and cut-ins so that it works much more ergonomically for smaller hands and smaller skewers. Even when I started, the big thing was trying to figure out how do you get a 90-pound female to be able to save a 250, 300-pound man. That's kind of what we did with our training, is figure out how to modify techniques and to make them capable of doing these skill sets.
One big problem with the other tube is they just disintegrate so quickly, and they absorb water, especially when that vinyl peels away and the foam is actually exposed, and then it just starts breaking down. We would walk into these beautiful facilities and see these destroyed, ratted out tubes. It just didn't mix well together. That was something we were challenged by, always having to buy new tubes over and over and over again. That was a big cost for us year over year, because we could only bill our customer one time, and then the rest of the time they're like, your lifeguard destroyed these, you have to pay for them.
Even as simple as openings for the straps on both sides of the tube. Once that strap gets torn or cut in any way, it compromises the tool itself. You don't want them going down to save someone and then it ripping apart in the middle of an emergency situation. So even just as simple as having a replaceable strap that you can keep the tube is big. The tube concept itself hasn't been touched in 100 years, and so there's just so much room to make improvement on.
Who came up with the idea first? Who said, I'm done buying these tubes, let's just fix it? How did you guys get started down that path?
I started thinking about the idea a long time ago, but Kevin was the one that took it and run with it. He's the one that even self-taught himself how to do the AutoCAD and do the hard design work behind it. There's been tons of iterations and little limitations of what the molds can do at this point with that type of foam. It's definitely been an interesting process of getting a tube that is what we want to see as the tool, but then also being able to achieve that with the technology that's out there right now.
Talk us through that a little bit, because I'm curious to the extent that you want to relive that trauma. What goes into designing a product? There's WD-40. There was 40 iterations before they got it right.
We've gone through multiple iterations and different manufacturing styles too. We started off with carving down a normal tube to get a shape we were thinking about. very rudimentary, boxy. But just to get an idea, we started off sending it off to people that were doing the traditional foam with the cover of the vinyl.
So
This is one of the original styles, and it's very boxy. You grab onto it, it cracks, and the buoyancy is not good.
thick.
That's where it started from. And then we quickly realized that that is not going to cut it. So then we had to restart investigating what other kind of foams are out there. And that's when we started going to all these companies and just getting a bunch of different samples, feeling them and scratching them. Does this work? Is this buoyant? Is this going to absorb water or not? We finally found the foam we're working with now. We got a sample of that in. We started with our first iteration of the drawing. We had to cut down because you're getting a mold made, and that mold has to have certain functionality for the actual injection machines to work and flow correctly and not bubble up.
Our first EVA foam one. It's very inflexible. No channeling on the grips. No cutout in the middle. So that what makes it really kind of firm.
We sent it off to some high level people in the industry, have them test it out. They come back with comments. We remake it. They come back with comments. We remade it, come back with comments. And then we finally got to our final one.
No shallower grips. We had the channeling this time. We were really happy with this one. We thought this was the one. And then we got some feedback about stiffness, and we were able to kind of get where we are today with the cutout.
From the first one, the focus was the grip and being able to handle it in water, especially with a smaller hand, because that's what we dealt with a lot while being trainers, especially with some of the harder deep water shapes where you're holding someone up, trying to get that tube stuffed under you to help float them at the top of the water. You see kids grasping that tube, slipping out of their hand 3 or 4 times. It gets exhausting. It distracts them. It pulls their attention away from the victim. And so one of our first main goals was to start creating those grips that help with that. As that evolved with the more of the angles, the tapers on the side, so it even made that more efficient. And then we realized that we didn't need such deep recesses, that it just needed to be a little bit of an edge. The cool thing on the last one, we got the information back about it being as stiff as it was. That middle channel was a magic thing for us, because then it gives you a target you can align the spine with. So it gives you a center grip that when you're stuffing the tube under someone's back, it's easy to grip, easy to aim, and get that tube centered on them. Even the material itself is more grippy than the traditional vinyl tool. And so it's very easy once you stuff it under someone just to grab. So you literally have this tube almost halfway off the victim, and it still is going to hold. So it's a lot more secure device when you're working with someone in the water.
For Canadians who are watching this, the Eva foam or Ava foam, it is Aquam out of Montreal. Their noodle line. So those green and stiff blue noodles that we use for aquatic fitness that are dense, aren't porous, don't break apart. This is that same material. When I touched it, I immediately recognized the material. It feels kind of like suede almost. It's a little bit sticky. And to your point, if I only got half a hand on the tube, I would still have moderate control, as opposed to the wet vinyl where it just goes shooting off and I've lost it. Or to your point, if I misjudge and I don't get it fully under the body, there's still some lift and there's still some traction because of that grippiness and the stability of the piece. It's not floppy. What was the design decision with the grooves?
For us, it was more trying to hit the buoyancy mark of the tubes that already exist, and then seeing how much we could take out of them to get it more lean for a smaller person to use. Kevin can speak to the buoyancy. What's our buoyancy number?
We're at 105 newtons at 48 inches. A normal 50-inch tube is at 100 newtons. We're more buoyant and a lot less material to fight with. It's a lot easier for the younger people and the smaller frames to grab onto. It makes trainings a lot easier, not even talking about saves, but training in general. You get a lot more lifeguards able to get through it and not be exhausted and get discouraged and not show up the next day because they couldn't do it. It helps a lot with that.
Even the fact that it's 48 inches, we realized after the fact you can use it as a makeshift measure stick for slides too.
Can you talk a little bit, for those of us not into physics and newtons, Do the other tubes claim to make a certain weight lift or anything like that? I've never looked at the sales literature on those items.
More about like buoyancy rather than like weight. Like it has 105 newtons or about 25 pounds of buoyancy to be able to bring something up. That doesn't sound very large, but it would classify, I believe, as a level 2 rescue vest if it was rated in terms of buoyancy.
We're trying to do some filming stuff with the tube and get some wire shots. That was probably one of the most difficult things we had the whole day, was trying to get these underwater shots. I'm 25. I had to use my whole body to force this thing underwater, and I could hold it under for a couple seconds and I'm popping right back up and having to go back down. So we had to take like 9,000 photos of it underwater. So it was pretty funny.
Feel your pain. When I was doing some Ruth Lee mannequin demos for my channel, the videographer was not a lifeguard. He was like, just run it again. I didn't get it. Let's run it again. I had to hire a lifeguard to tow the mannequin back in place. I have no problem doing the rescue, but we had 3 hours of video booked. You're pulling the same 5-meter or 15-foot stretch again and again. You're trying to get the shot, but it can be really difficult. Like, one of the questions I had, because your guards work with tubes all the time, how do you require them to stand either holding it or carrying it? Because one of the challenges I've seen in Canadian pools, pool managers don't want their guards to clip them or to wrap the tube with the strap because it damages it. But if you're not tall, it's dragging on the floor or it's dragging off the chair. How do you guys direct your team to hold them? And then how did you engineer your tube to fit with that?
I was just going to say, I mean, just across the chest, really coming around here like this. And that way they're walking around or have it up on stand. We have a lot of stationary stand positions. And so we really designed it in mind with that, being able to be on stand, but comfortably. And it not be cumbersome or anything like that.
That's why we added that cutout too, is because it created that ability to bend the tube around you and being a lot more comfortable while holding it. The other big thing that we're always harping on is holding the strap in your actual hand instead of wrapping around the tube, because then when you enter water, the strap doesn't function properly if you have it wrapped around the tube. So that's a big thing from day one. Every time we come on sites, we're always watching those kids and seeing if they have it balled up in their hand or if they have it draped over the guard, chair. And that's the danger of those things. If you don't have them in your hand properly, they can catch the guard stand as you jump in, especially in a shallow water save. You're pulling in the stand on top of you and that's sandwiched under a stand while someone's struggling in the water that you're trying to get to.
I'm sure you have been using these with your team at your facilities for a while. How have they held up? How's the feedback been from the guards? What's that been like?
I actually was cleaning out my backyard this weekend and I forgot that I had one out there for several years. And it was perfectly good. There was no degradation at all on the tube. We're deploying them in mass right now, but we have been using them at trainings and things like that. The thing that I would really just want to emphasize is the confidence that our people have with this is so much better. Like Kevin spoke to earlier, we would have so many people quit trainings because the skills were too hard. They were getting too tired, having to run these drills over and over again. To be able to do a deep water save was really challenging for our people. And this has given them so much ability to make a couple mistakes and still be able to get the objective, even if something doesn't go perfectly the first time. To me, that's been where we've seen the most success.
That's the cool thing too, is everyone we've shown this to, we've had such positive feedback on it, because it's such a tool that hasn't been touched in such a long time or worked in a creative way like what we were able to do. It almost sells itself once people see it, put it in their hands. Oh my God, this is the coolest thing. They're excited to use it. They want to get in the water and try it out. We've had a lot of positive feedback. Even in the earlier iterations, we had tons of positive feedback. It was almost being more and more critical of how can we make this better. And that's what we've always done.
I'm not saying this just because we're chatting. When I was able to touch it and see it and feel it, and this was not in water, this was in a conference room environment. Based on my personal experience, I knew the foam was great. And then the design features that you've mentioned have better clarified my understanding. I ordered one last week. I'm excited to get it, to be able to try it. But I would say in general, to anyone who's been resistant to tubes, which a lot of Canadian lifeguards have been, this product appears to solve a lot of the issues. So for me, it was small hands. I can do tons of rescues, but my hands are still small. Couldn't grab the foam, couldn't get enough wraps on the strap to pull. If I pulled on the strap, I was worried it was going to rip, and then couldn't push it under a victim easily. I didn't have enough force to get the whole tube under because it was so long and floppy. So a lot of those problems are going to be easily resolved by just switching to a different product. Can you talk a little bit about the testing? I know you've sought third-party testing to confirm some of the design elements.
We sent our tube into a lab. We had used it several times, but we wanted to make sure, does this meet the requirements or the standards of the current tube? We sent it off, paid for the testing. That's where we're able to quote the buoyancy rates. One of the cool parts of the test was the way they did the buoy. They actually bent it in a U shape and then constantly plunging it to find the failure rate. So that was a real great stress test on the cutout and the structure of it. They also had it attached to the strap area. That was one of the other things we were worried about, is if it gets pulled enough, is the strap going to rip at the point of attachment, because that's the narrowest point. We were able to confirm basically this tube isn't going to float things before the strap is going to come off. That was really encouraging. This isn't just what we want to see. It actually is proven that it's just as buoyant. It won't fail. It has the structural hold of being able to do the things we want it to do.
We also sent it off to a couple of other training teams from different companies and organizations and got feedback from them. That was where we heard about the stiffness and the limitations that brought to certain lifeguards, and then figuring out how to come up with a creative solution.
I really love that you actually sought that feedback, because I think there's so many traditional manufacturers. They just make a sketch and send it to the factory. None of those people in those offices are ever on deck, on stand, never in the water. They don't have any sense of what it's actually like to use this equipment.
The person who trained Charles and I as lifeguard instructors, and really gave us a lot of advice when we were starting off with barefoot. That's exactly who we went back to for Steadfast. He's been a trainer for years, and a really knowledgeable guy. And he was able to point out the stiffness, get us a bunch of feedback from his instructors.
Has anyone tried waterfront or any other environments with this product? Any feedback there yet?
The hanging test, didn't we do like a hanging test?
Just basically hanging it with weights to see if it had a fail point, and it really doesn't.
The only way we've been able to cut or penetrate our tube is with a saw, pretty much.
Yeah.
You can even take a knife to it and go pretty hard on it. It might make a little groove in it, but it's still very, very hard to even cut into it with a knife. That's the cool thing about this material, that since it's the same material throughout the whole tube, you get a cut in it, you could bend that tube. It's not going to advance the cut. It's not going to make it worse. It's a really cool material, and it is extremely durable. We've been impressed with like the durability of it and how much we can kind of torture this thing. It looked like nothing happened.
Non-absorbent material is really key in those beach and island environments, because it won't have that rotting effect. So we're pretty excited about it to be deployed in those environments, because we think it'll hold up really well.
That's very much my experience with the pool noodles. When they first came out with the pool noodles made of this Ava foam, people rolled their eyes because they were $30 or $40 each Canadian. And who's going to pay that? But once you've been through one summer of 2 boxes of open cell 99-cent noodles that flop and the foam breaks everywhere, the first time I bought them, my manager was like, "You're spending $1,000 on pool noodles," but they were fine when I left 5 or 6 years later. They don't soak up water, exactly like you said. I would compare it to the innovation Crocs made for us in terms of the antimicrobial footwear on deck, where Croc can be drenched in water and it doesn't absorb it.
I plan on doing yellow and blue as well. So a lot of those beach waterfront places want yellow for contrast. And we're adding a couple of attachments. Some people do like to wrap it around the victim or the guest in distress and clip it. So we're coming up with those attachments as well. We have a couple like sites that are fake beach fronts. We don't have any open waters, but we've talked to a couple people that do open waters, and they have been talking about that this tube was working way better than the torpedoes. They said the torpedoes were slowing them down and it's hard to swim with them. There's some other ones that are wider and it slows you down whenever you're swimming. So this one has a nice streamlined shape to it that cuts through the water easier. It doesn't really hold you back or weigh you down. And the salt water's not going to break it down either.
That's what came to mind for me, is that you could swim with the sash on, drag it behind you, and it's skinnier, so less resistance when you're swimming. So you've got new colors, the attachments. You guys are promoting this in your spare time at different conferences and trade shows. What's next for Steadfast?
The whole idea of Steadfast is to go through and start improving the different things we've used forever in the lifeguard industry. So another small project that we've been working on is we have redesigned the whistle itself. We use emergency oxygen in a lot of our sites. So there you go. That little rectangle hole in there is actually the wrench size of an oxygen tank. So now all of our lifeguards have the ability to just take off their whistle, open an oxygen tank, and go,
Yeah.
rather than needing that special key for it. That's one of the issues. We have those keys in every one of our first aid kits. They get used 1 or 2 times. They get lost in the first stage of the summer. One of the lifeguards, maybe one of the managers, doesn't inventory the first aid bag appropriately. At the end of summer, they got to use the O2 again, and now we don't have a key to use it anymore. And then the cool thing with it being a 3D printed concept, we've been able to use, Blake just showed you a see-through, what is that color, tan or brown, Kev?
Different logos. We're printing some out right now for a different center, so you can have custom logos on them as well. The different colors and the logo on them. Our guards are going pretty wild for them. We're doing first come, first serve. So if you show up to training early, you get your first choice on your whistle color.
I love that. Whistle's not a big expense, but not a small expense either to get a quality one that actually performs at the right pitch and doesn't break apart. Oxygen is limited, depends where you are in Canada, but exactly to that point, having a multi-tool or something that removes those little pieces that don't get inventoried, even though they're supposed to, and the form's been pencil whipped, and then you need it and you don't have it, and the spares are not cheap.
We have a couple different projects we're building that help improve the lifeguards' ability to do their job, having the tools in an easy access place, being able to get things quickly, do their job more efficiently. The lifeguard industry in itself, I always say it's kind of wild. We, train 15 to mid 20-year-olds to save people's lives. A lot of these guys, they have 4 days of training. Our kids could be on site for maybe 2-3 weekends, and then all of a sudden they're getting hit with one of the biggest holidays of the summer, with hundreds and hundreds of people at the pool. That's the hardest part of this industry, is that we get minimal time to train these guys. Very high level life-saving skills. We give them a whole bunch of tools. We introduce them into a new world that most of these kids have never done life-saving skills before. And then, unlike other first responders, practicing their skills every single day, because they're responding to medical emergencies every single day. These kids, we do in-services every week. We're always trying to improve and work through different situations, but some of these kids could go 2 months before they actually have to perform a life-saving skill on a real person in a real life situation. And to be able to regurgitate that and react properly and know where all your tools are, be able to use and access those tools very quickly, that's a lot of brain function in a very short amount of time. So anything we can do to make that process more efficient for them is going to be a lot better for our guest in distress, our victim, and being able to do the proper thing at the proper time.
I'm a huge proponent that if the product doesn't work, nobody's going to use it. So it doesn't matter if we're talking about a lifeguard tube or we're talking about a water test kit. If it's not intuitive, if it creates more friction or pain points, nobody's going to use it. And then the task doesn't get done, and it's just going to snowball from there. I'm excited to get my hands on my tube when it arrives. People were resistant to switching to tubes when it became an option about 10 years ago in Canada. People were hesitant because they couldn't figure out how to solve some of these problems without more training. And as you just said, we give our guards already so much training to meet the baseline, to then say, hey, let's switch to this specialized piece of equipment that you may or may not be able to use under pressure. It sounds like you've had great success with this, actually solving that issue for your team.
The guards up in Canada do they use a flotational device, or it's just?
I was first certified as a lifeguard in 2003, and we used kickboards, flutter boards. It's not a life-saving device, but what I would say now as a trainer of lifeguards, I'll show them tubes, I'll show them kickboards. It basically says, you have the integrity as a national lifeguard to make a decision based on the rescue, the circumstance, the victims, and available resources, what you will use. So if you need to use a beach ball, use a beach ball. But the technique we evaluate has to be at a minimum competency. And unfortunately, still, I would say in a 40-hour lifeguard class, after 2 pre-classes, most get to competency efficiency fastest with kickboards. If I show a rescue tube right now at the facilities that I work at, it's super squishy, it gets soggy, it's hard to grasp, or it's too long and it's hard to aim. And as you guys know, in a tight lesson plan, when you're covering all these skills for the first time, some candidates are just not willing to put in the extra effort to master tubes. I would say in my province, maybe I can think of 10% of facilities that actively require their guards to use tubes. They onboard them with tubes, they practice with tubes, but the baseline skills, most facilities I would say are kickboards, or some places are using a throw bag. Depends on the environment.
I'm extremely excited for you guys to get this.
Sounds like Canada's gonna love our tubes.
It blew my mind, just as a quick history lesson. The reason the tubes even came about is we've had one national lifeguard training standard for almost 100 years. And then 10 years ago, the Canadian Red Cross came out with a new lifeguard standard. It was very controversial at the time, but it was accredited in some provinces. They were tube focused. I went to a transfer class because I was interested in the certification, interested in learning about it. I was useless with the tube. I could not pull it down in deep water rescues. I could not coil it. I could not get it under in the time that they gave us. Could I have spent 5 hours on my own learning? Absolutely. But I don't train for that program, and that program disappeared 2 years ago. Tube is just one of 4 or 5 options I'm covering in a class where we're teaching minimum standard, and then occupational requirements may be different. We know it's going to lift a 300-pound guy. We know it's going to help a 90-pound guard. That piece is amazing, but some of the techniques that they were endorsing in that old program, they wanted us to slide the tube under the spine board rails to float it in deep water. And with those squishy sausage tubes, they were rocking side to side. It was more of a safety hazard, in my personal opinion, than it was worth. But your tube is flat.
That's one of the reasons why we changed the Star Guard this year, because we started looking at their deep water techniques and saw how much quicker it sped up the save time, eliminates some of those issues you're talking about, going far down in the water and trying to use that tube to get yourself back up to the top, but also being limited to how deep you can go in the water because the tube can be restrictive. And we switched to Star Guard and saw how much this could even be a more effective a tool, especially with some of their techniques, like the ridges that are on the whole part of the tube allows you to easily be able to hold the tube at the top of the water with your hands and then sink your head under the water and being able to pick the people up with your feet and pull them up to the top of the water, which is a really cool technique that we love using now. And definitely speeds up deep water tremendously from what we were using in the years past.
Philosophically, one of the challenges we have in Canada with lifeguarding in general is it's a bit more formulaic than I think it should be. Some trainers are setting up a very specific flow chart of this is what you do, this is how you do it. And it doesn't always give the candidates or the lifeguards enough creative thinking of what am I going to do in a unique environment. And exactly what you're describing, as you were talking, I'm thinking, oh yeah, so if I grab the tube and those parts where there's the circles, I could grab it with my hand and then tuck it under my armpit if I needed to, and it could trail behind me. And I would then have another arm free to swim or drag or pull. I really like products that are versatile.
And we had it getting tested out in California, and they actually said that it was great for their swim lessons because the kids would be able to hold 5 kids on one kickboard basically. And we didn't have that in mind at all. And so that was cool to see that.
Once you use it a little bit, you start getting the idea with the different pieces of it, is so that you don't have to visually see the tube. You can reach for that tube, and after you use it 2 or 3 times, you know where your hand placement is just by touching the tube. I know I'm on the end by the circular opening for the strap. I know I'm in the dimpled area where it has the channels. Oh, I'm a little farther in on the ridge side, and then I found the middle of it kind of thing. You can reach for that tube and that tactile feeling, rather than if you're struggling to see, your eyes are burning, you've been in training all day, and it's harder to when you come to the top of the water.
There's endless options. For me, the obvious one was tug of war, people swimming against the tube, trying to push it over the line, dragging activities. There's so many options. I think you guys have really started something awesome. So I'm congratulations, because it's no small feat to bring something to market. It's a lot of work.
When we started doing some of the videoing, one of the guys pointed out it makes it much easier to hang on a wall. Just by those holes being at the end of the tube, put a little hook on the wall and you can hang these things up. It's easy to keep them up off the ground. They're not stacked together.
That's the only thing maybe to think about in the future is I do love those little sleeves where it's guard of the week or guard of the month.
We've actually had someone talk to us about that too. looking at it, how we have that little indent in the middle, like once we put a little neoprene cover in the middle of that thing, it's gonna look super cool. So we're excited to have that little add-on, the guard of the month, or even being able to do logoing for different sites or the water parks. We're definitely moving towards that as a solution too.
So I want to say a big thank you for joining me and talking about your brand new tube. So it's available through Steadfast Safety, their website. Let's stay in touch because you guys are onto a good thing. And I hope that you're able to continue innovating and finding more of these products that serve our industry, because it was definitely a pain point for a lot of us. That's for sure.
Definitely. Thank you for having us.